The finest opportunity ever given to the world was thrown away because the passion for equality made vain the hope for freedom. Lord Acton. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Cause. I truly appreciate you being here. My name is Rob, and today we're going to be discussing Book 7 in our 8-book reading series, which is The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich A. Hayek. If you want to check out the other books in this series, they will be linked down in the description below. This book is dense and was published in 1944 during the last year of World War II. Hitler is in power. Collectivism and classical liberalism are at war. To better understand World War II, you have to have an idea of the economics and the political ideals that led up to it. The flames of liberty and socialism can be kindled with the tools of propaganda. What these flames can consume is what we are going to discuss today. So let's uncover who Friedrich Hayek is really quick, and then we'll proceed into his book.
Maybe you got lost somewhere, swimming too far off the beach, off the coastline.
Hayek was born in Vienna, Austria in 1899. 17 years later, he would be pulled into World War I, where he served with the artillery regiment for the Austro-Hungarian army. He would fight on the Italian front, and he suffered damage to his left ear. World War I would play a decisive influence on the path he would take in life. The scars of war, internal and external, have a way of shaping the path one decides to take. Hayek would attend the University of Vienna, and he would be exposed to all the political ideologies of the early 1920s. He would study philosophy and economics throughout his school years and would join the faculty at the London School of Economics. Hayek would debate John Maynard Keynes, and it is important to note that Hayek and Keynes had opposing viewpoints on the role of government intervention into the economy. Hayek would become a British subject in 1938 after the rise of Nazism, and he would begin to challenge the views against socialism, Marxism, and Nazism. Now, this book builds up. The first part is setting up the groundwork. By the halfway point of the book, it really gets interesting and deep. We start to see what can occur and what the results may be once the educational ideas of society changes. This is an important point for this reading series. What may be thought of as insignificant changes may result in catastrophic consequences. And I will cover what I believe is the most important chapter of the book as it relates to our current reality, which is chapter 11. Also note, Hayek is in Britain during World War II writing this book to warn Britain about what possibly could happen in the future if they follow down the path of collectivism. Now, this book would be more widely read and consumed by those in the United States. After reading, we are left with the question, has Britain or the United States heeded any of Hayek's warnings? That is the question we need to ask while going through this book. So with no further ado, let's start peeling back the onion and see what Hayek has to offer us. The book starts off with a great line on personal accountability. When the course of civilization takes an unexpected turn, when instead of the continuous progress which we have come to expect, we find ourselves threatened by evils associated by us with past ages of barbarism, we naturally blame anything but ourselves. Progress is not always positive, and sometimes you can progress in the wrong direction by forgetting or erasing the foundations that supported progress in the first place. Having the humility to admit that is key. We may progressively start to relinquish the foundational ideas on which Western civilization was built in exchange for economic safety and political promises. Hayek mentions a good point here. We have to be careful with importing ideas into our system. An invasive seed blown in the garden can often consume the entire crop. And he next brings up words and their importance. Socialism began increasingly to make use of the promise of a new freedom. The coming of socialism was to be the leap from the realm of necessity to the realm of freedom. It was to bring economic freedom. Rebrand the definition of the word and just watch how fast we will start believing it. Sprinkle the propaganda, water the lies, and all of a sudden, freedom is slavery and war is peace. You just walked into the world of Orwell. Now, I want to read the next part because this is important. The subtle change in the meaning to which the word freedom was subjected, in order that this argument should sound plausible, is important. Freedom in the old sense meant freedom from coercion, freedom from the arbitrary power of other men, freedom to choose instead of being ordered. But Hayek states, the new freedom promised, however, was to be freedom from necessity, release from the compulsion of the circumstances which inevitably limit the range of choice of us all, although for some very much more than for others. Before man could be truly free, the despotism of physical want had to be broken, the restraints of the economic system relaxed. But what exactly does this new freedom entail? It seems more of a freedom from choice or freedom from responsibility and accountability. Freedom is not an easy burden to carry. With freedom comes duties and responsibilities and the respect for others' beliefs that differ from your own. He pushes his point a little further here. The demand for the new freedom was thus only another name for the old demand for an equal distribution of wealth. For there to be an equal distribution of outcome, there has to be a reduction in freedom for some. The true meaning of the word is important. As we are about to see, the equal distribution of wealth may appear to some to be the road to freedom, but in actuality, it is the road to serfdom. He brings up another point that will tie into this. Socialist movements tend to start out with good intentions, but as the growth of the socialist movement develops and progresses, the powers behind it start to shift, and the fuel needed to keep the movement going becomes more extreme. Hayek said Hitler and Mussolini all began as socialists, but once the brake lines are cut and the car is moving, anyone with the strength or the power can pull the wheel in a new direction. But there is no stopping the movement at this point. Remember, FDR was praising Mussolini in the early 1930s. Even high-level policymakers cannot see where the tracks of the programs lead. That praise would eventually turn to conflict. So if the administration of FDR can be fooled, then what hope does the youth have? The youth are the ones targeted with the propaganda. But he says this next. The relative ease which a young communist could be converted into a Nazi, or vice versa, was generally known in Germany, best of all to the propagandists of the two parties. The collectivist groups screaming out against Nazism or fascism now will be the ones ripe for the harvest when the propaganda is used to blow them in a different direction. In fact, it already has. The growing discontent of the liberal Western civilization is proof that the presses of propaganda are in full operation. The communists and fascists will be competing for the young collectivists who have misplaced the meaning of Western liberalism, lost in the convenience and distraction of our times. You can't convince the liberal of the old type to deny the independence of self-thought and self-governance enough to pick up the flag of socialism. But you can change the direction of men without chest, the men we met with C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man. Only with the hijacking of the word liberal has this been able to occur. Hayek says, Hitler has never claimed to represent true liberalism. Liberalism, then, has the distinction of being the doctrine most hated by Hitler. It should be added that this hatred had little occasion to show itself in practice merely because by the time Hitler came to power, liberalism was to all intents and purposes dead in Germany, and it was socialism that had killed it. The growth of communism and socialism is a runaway train with no brakes. You can promise the world, but after a point you cannot determine which track the train is going to take. You may get a philosopher king or you may get Hitler or Stalin. The problem is the individuals wanting to steer the ship of socialism are the ones most hungry for power and control. Gandhi is not going to be in the lineup, and the Mother Teresas are too busy cleaning up the mess. It will be the loudest, most voracious, and ego-centered individuals that will finally take control of the wheel. The power needs to stay in the republic, divided, checked, and cyclically replenished. Hayek says the idea of democracy and socialism coalescing is a farce. His warning is too good not to share. That democratic socialism, the great utopia of the last few generations, is not only unachievable, but that to strive for it produces something so utterly different that few of those who now wish it would be prepared to accept the consequences. Many will not believe until the connection has been laid bare in all its aspects. Let's define socialist as Hayek thought about it real quick. Hayek says socialism is used to describe merely the ideals of social justice, greater equality, and the security, which are the ultimate aims of socialism. He continues with this. In this sense, socialism means the abolition of private enterprise, of private ownership of the means of production and the creation of a system of planned economy in which the entrepreneur working for profit is replaced by a central planning body. But what if this central planning authority uses a different strategy and realizes they can exercise control by pulling everyone into a corporation and by minimizing the many small businesses, and control the economy by central planning through corporations? Think about this. Now, the government can just make a mandate to the corporations and programs roll out. Healthcare can be pushed through companies that hire. If you don't meet a certain social score, you don't get a loan. If the government wants to push social programs such as DEI, they can do it through the corporations. Okay, now what happens when the pendulum swings to the extreme right in retaliation? It's a game of division, and we will eventually all lose. Hayek says, we must centrally direct economic activity if we want to make the distribution of income conform to current ideas of social justice. The planned economy can take many shapes. The redistribution of land and wealth, from agricultural subsidies to welfare. There is power behind this, and this power is why it is pursued. The sentiment may be noble, but the issue lies with the control and the power. Hayek states, but it would make the very men who are most anxious to plan society the most dangerous if they were allowed to do so. I believe we are currently witnessing this across the world. In Chapter 5 on Planning and Democracy, we reached one of the most important concepts of the book, the conflict between individual freedom and collectivism. The different forms of collectivism, communism and fascism, differ among themselves in the nature of their goals. They're all different from liberalism in the sense they want to organize the whole and refuse to recognize the value in individualism. The collectivist focus on general welfare, common good, and social justice is flawed in Hayek's opinion. He says this about the collectivist. The ends about which he can be concerned will always be only an infinitesimal fraction of the needs of all men. Pushing one program, race, or issue over others will always create conflict, jealousy, and animosity. But in regards to individualism, he mentions that it is not our egotism or selfishness, but that we limit our imagination when we put our planning in control of a single professional or politician. The value and scales of achievement are different. This is stifled once placed in the hands of a group or individual in control of planning for the whole. Now, because there cannot be a majority view on everything, democracy and collectivism start to pull each other apart. Hayek says, yet agreement that planning is necessary, together with the inability of democratic assemblies to produce a plan, will evoke stronger and stronger demands that the government or some single individual should be given power to act on their own responsibility. This belief is becoming more and more widespread that if things are to get done, the responsible authorities must be freed from the fetters of democratic procedure. As our culture continues to shift in the direction of instant gratification, I fear we will not have the patience that a democratic republic takes to get things achieved or passed. The more divided we become, the more attractive a single leader becomes to achieving what a certain group wants done. And maybe that is at the expense of the rest. But what are we willing to give up morally to see our side win? Hayek says, Hitler did not have to destroy democracy. He merely took advantage of the decay of democracy, and at the critical moment obtained the support of the many to whom, though they detested Hitler, he yet seemed the only man strong enough to get things done. If the propaganda succeeds in making you hate your fellow citizens enough, you may be driven to align with stronger powers regardless of how evil and support things deep down you would never approve of, all out of fear and hate which has been wedged into your thinking by the media, screens, and political propaganda. Democracies appear to stumble when the populace no longer value the freedoms of individualism. Hayek then brings capitalism back into the focus. It is now often said that democracy will not tolerate capitalism. If capitalism means here a competitive system based on free disposal of private property, it is far more important to realize that only within this system is democracy possible. When it becomes dominated by a collectivist creed, democracy will inevitably destroy itself. Hayek makes it clear here that democracy is not to be idolized. Democracy is not the goal, but the means. It is the vehicle to get us somewhat closer to the destination we desire to be. It is just one tool used in our constitutional republic. He says, democracy is essentially a means, a utilitarian device for safeguarding internal peace and individual freedom. We all know that democracies made up of a vast majority can be just as tyrannical as a dictator, and I love how he puts this next part. Our point, however, is not that dictatorship must inevitably extirpate freedom, but rather that planning leads to dictatorship because dictatorship is the most effective instrument of coercion and enforcement of ideals, and as such, essential if central planning on a large scale is to be possible. Did you catch that? Hayek is saying a dictator does not destroy freedom. Freedom is reduced and removed during the process leading up to a dictator, through the collectivist movements and the programs that weaken liberty. A dictator just makes sure the weeds of freedom do not pop back up. When the power is distributed among the people, it makes it very hard to plan an economy. For the plan or collectivism to work, you have to remove some of the power of the individual and reduce the freedom to control the outcome. Hayek says, there can be no doubt that planning necessarily involves deliberate discrimination between particular needs of different people and allowing one man to do what another must be prevented from doing. The only way to ensure equality is to remove some of the freedom, rights, and resources from one and shift it to the others. This will be an act of discrimination to those who produce to the benefits of those who consume, and it sounds noble and charitable, but he continues, to produce the same result for different people, it is necessary to treat them differently. To give different people the same objective opportunities is not to give them the same subjective chance. It cannot be denied that the rule of law produces economic inequality. Think about that for a bit. I want to bring up a major takeaway from this portion of the book. We trade our personal responsibility in when we choose the socialist or collectivist approach. We are saying we cannot be responsible for ourselves, so we need a group or an institution to decide for us. For security, whether economic or physical safety, we are advised to give up the power of choice and place the power in the hands of those who plan, those who govern and control. Time goes by living like this, and we become sold to the idea that somebody has our best interest at hand. This dependency weakens our ability to see through the veil and softens our resolve to resist tyranny and takeover whenever it arrives. But it may not be affecting you yet. Next, we're going to determine who and whom. Who is supposed to plan whom? Who gets what, when, and how? It's all about control because he who controls holds the power. And where does it all start? We don't just wake up one day with fascism knocking at our door, and we don't wake up the next day and a dictator just spontaneously appears at the head of the state. The road to serfdom is long and winding, and we may be on the course right now. The road signs are visible, but most of us are too distracted to take the time to read them. Hayek says, it was not the fascists, but the socialists who began to collect children from the tender stage in political organizations to make sure that they grew up as good proletarians. It was the socialists who first insisted that the party member should distinguish himself from others by modes of greetings and the forms of address. Heaven forbid if we label someone wrong who labels themselves a lie. Now, chapter 9 is where the book really starts to kind of pick up. And I feel Hayek has been setting the book up for the first half. And at this point, he starts to bring the topics home. We now move into security and freedom. Which one do you want? Or are you one of those who think you can have both? Hayek states, independence of mind or strength of character is rarely found among those who cannot be confident that they will make their way by their own effort. But as we lose sight of individualism by losing confidence in it, we gravitate to a desire for security. Self-reliance is exchanged for a collective dependency, and this demand for security becomes a danger to liberty. Hayek explains it this way. What is constantly being done is to grant this kind of security piecemeal to this group and then to that, with the result that for those who are left out in the cold, the insecurity constantly increases. No wonder that, in consequence, the value attached to the privilege of security constantly increases. The demand for it becomes more and more urgent, until, in the end, no price, not even that of liberty, appears too high. We have all given up willingly individual freedoms that our great-grandfathers would have gone to war over. and we are not even the happier for it. Now, he mentioned something next that has become so clear in the last decade or so. If a group of individuals wants to give up their freedom for security, they expect and demand that you do the same as well. He says, those who are willing to surrender their freedom for security have always demanded that if they give up their full freedom, it should also be taken from those not prepared to do so. Why is that? We as humans, for some reason, love the feeling that we can control what our neighbor does down the street, whether it's what they do with their body to gun control. If I disagree with the freedom, then nobody should have it. Maybe freedom's become too burdensome, and are we even responsible enough to have it anymore? The easy life of vice becomes more attractive than the laborious yoke of liberty, and our values start to change as we seek the comforts of security. We become different as people when this shift starts to happen. And the next few lines really hammer this idea home. Only few will resist the temptation of safety at the price of freedom. And more should come to feel that without economic security, liberty is not worth having. Freedom can only be had at a price, and we may be asked to give up material success and sacrifice security to preserve our liberty. But most of us do not carry out the duties currently required of liberty. We have all become afflicted with the main character syndrome, and liberty is only what personally benefits the self. Our values have just changed. In Chapter 10, we come across one of the most important topics of the book, and I hope I can explain this in a way that makes sense. So, we have these moral convictions that push us into collectivism. We want security and safety, equality, and maybe even equity. It starts off with good intentions. We all deep down desire to live in a better world. Social programs are attractive, and when based on emotion alone, they are very hard to argue against. But Hayek says this. Our question, however, is what moral views will be produced by a collectivist organization of society, or what views are likely to rule it? The interaction between morals and institutions may well have the effect that the ethics produced by collectivism will be altogether different from the moral ideals that lead to the demand for collectivism. Think about that. It's hard to control a movement, a mob, or a protest. Even with noble sentiments, things can turn against you very quickly. The intentions were good, but you didn't realize who was going to hijack the group and lead it in a way you never expected. He provides a little context here with Germany and Italy. The socialists who started the movement were hindered by their democratic ideals, and Hayek states, they did not possess the ruthlessness required for the performance of their chosen task. It is characteristic that both in Germany and in Italy, the success of fascism was preceded by the refusal of the socialist parties to take over the responsibilities of government. The socialists had loaded the musket, primed the charge, but the socialist movements are not strong enough or ruthless enough to completely take control because of the democratic ideals which started them. The socialist leadership during this time, they couldn't pull the trigger. But someone in the next phase of power can, and will most likely not share any of the same intentions that initially started the movement. The peaceful snowball creates an unrecognizable avalanche, and we all suffer the consequences. Now, Hayek says there are a few reasons why the leaders of the groups will most likely not be the most noble characters. He gives 3 principles on how these leaders come to be, and the second I want to focus on as it is relevant to our current times. He says this in regards to selecting leaders. Here comes in the second negative principle of selection. He will be able to obtain the support of all the docile and gullible, who have no strong convictions of their own, but are prepared to accept a ready-made system of values if it is only drummed into their ears sufficiently loudly and frequently. It will be those whose vague and imperfectly formed ideas are easily swayed and whose passions and emotions are readily aroused, who will thus swell the ranks of the totalitarian party. Come on. This is why C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man, is so important to understand. If a government, society, or movement ever succeeds in removing the traditions, the culture, and ideals of moral individualism, it will be replaced by something more controllable, ideals that are more emotional and more excitable. And the best way to create gullible people is to erase the foundational values and replace them with something acceptable by the planners. And I've discussed this before, that understanding your identity and your culture is important. If you do not have deep convictions about why you believe what you believe, your mind is literally in jeopardy. You will be surprised how many of the intelligentsia, academics, and the scientists support these movements for their own security. The third negative principle of selecting a bad leader is this, and this one is good. I mean, if I can get you to hate something, I can probably get a few people to hate something, then I can almost guarantee the passions to end that which we now hate will be greater than to save what we love. Human nature, if not educated, if not nurtured, and if not taught, will most likely side with the passion of destroying. That's just our nature. Hayek says this about the third and perhaps most important element of selection. It seems to be almost a law of human nature that it is easier for people to agree on a negative program, on the hatred of an enemy, on the envy of those better off, than on any positive task. We see this in war. We see this in politics. As the morals and the values of society decrease, politics will focus more on destroying the other side and less on improving the overall situation of the whole. We're about to get into another very important part. If we ever place the collective before the individual, we will begin to lose the identity needed to safeguard liberty. Members in a group or a party are only respected among the party if they share the same views. There is no room for toleration, for individual thought or disagreement. Individuals craving collectivism will tend to derive their dignity from their membership instead of their own personal identity. Think about this. Hayek says, this desire to identify yourself with a group is a feeling of inferiority. Hayek states, an increasing tendency among modern men to imagine themselves ethical because they have delegated their vices to larger and larger groups. To act on behalf of a group seems to free people of many of the moral restraints which control their behavior as individuals within the group. That is so good. Think about how much you see this. We join a group to say we are pro this or anti that, and the joining and the being part of something, it allows our imagination to be flooded with the idea that we are ethical, progressive, and doing something great, all the while never doing any actual deeds, works, or acts. Maybe that is what James meant by faith without works is dead. The other point is how a group can free you from your moral restraints to commit acts you would never do as an individual, from destroying public property to weeding out opposition by going house to house. What is the limit behind what the collectivists will do? How do we go from equity and equality to boots kicking in doors of those we don't agree with or that we think don't belong? Hayek says, there can be no limit to what its citizens must be prepared to do, no act which his conscience must prevent him from committing, if it is necessary for an end which the community has set itself or which his superiors order him to achieve. If you value the collective over the individual, you will value your safety over your freedom, the value of security over liberty. And if you are getting paid to do these things, then that security translates to obedience. The process of getting to the state will relinquish the will of most to obey his conscience and limit his old Jiminy Cricket. Cruelty may become a duty, especially for words and speech that is offensive or against the will of the collective, and it will be justified to kick the doors down for mean tweets and disparaging comments. It justifies them because the pursuit of the common end of society can know no limits in any rights or values of an individual. If moral beliefs, religion, tradition, or culture do not align with the group, then it has to be diminished, ridiculed, and denounced. It has to be removed or replaced. Hayek states, the only states which are satisfied are the taste for power as such and the pleasure of being obeyed and of being part of a well-functioning and immensely powerful machine to which everything else must give way. There is nothing a collectivist group loves more than having others obey them. Like an addictive drug, it can never be enough, and the final goal can only end in self-destruction. We next move into the best chapter in the entire book. If you do not have the time to read the entire book, I would highly suggest just reading chapter 11. It's called The End of Truth. Hayek states, the most effective way of making everybody serve the single system of ends toward which the social plan is directed is to make everybody believe in those ends. Orwell must have been taking some notes. A generally accepted creed allows for the masses to act in unison for the purpose of the planner. If all the news, the media, and the current information are mostly controlled by a network or a single source, then the shift in sentiments and ideas can be guided, scripted out, divvied out, and recited perfectly. In modern times, the tools have advanced. The algorithm is getting to a point where it can take you down a path, change your purchasing habits, your ideas, your attitude, and even your thought process. Hayek states, the skillful propagandist then has power to mold their minds in any direction he chooses. And even the most intelligent and independent people cannot entirely escape that influence if they are long isolated from all other sources of information. You might be intelligent enough to know something is off or not right, but when all the miscommunication is combined with the noise, the best you can be left with is confusion. You will know that things do not make sense, but you won't know why. Truth is one of the foundations of our morals. I'll harp on this a good bit, but I truly believe that old books, unabridged and unaltered, will be the only resemblance left of truth over the next few decades. The classics are not just a preference, but a safeguard to the treasury of truth. The respect for honesty is so important because it allows us to reason correctly and value things appropriately. If truth is ever eliminated, then it will become very easy to sway your values, your morals, and your beliefs. Without truth, you can construct theories, make assertions about facts that don't align, and create myths to justify any action, to justify all your preconceived opinions. A tool or strategy used to allow this to happen is the perversion of language. Take older words and slowly start to change their meaning. Another strategy is indoctrination. And we all like to individually think we are immune to indoctrination. We can see through it. They won't get me. But your views, I can guarantee, have been affected by some form of indoctrination, and that is the point. You may not even realize it because it has been your entire life. Hayek states, the schools and the press, radio, and motion picture will be used exclusively to spread those views which, whether true or false, will strengthen the belief in rightness of the decisions taken by the authority, and all information that might cause doubt or hesitation will be withheld. 2020 was proof of this. Heaven forbid if anyone spoke out against the direction of authority. It showed just how fast the masses would pull together and give up every freedom just for the idea of safety. And in the grand scheme, it was not about safety at all, but testing controls and power. What can we get away with now, and how far can we push the crowd? We know this because the planners were going about life and not participating in the plans they mandated. When our focus is no longer truth, but loyalty to a party, what ends will we stop at to suppress the other side? And Hayek states, the probable effect on the people's loyalty to the system becomes the only criterion for deciding whether a particular piece of information is to be published or suppressed. The suppression of truth is just getting started. I fear we have not seen the extent to which the opposing groups will be willing to go to snuff it out completely. The word truth will cease to have its old meaning. It will become my truth, your truth. Truth will become whatever interests the group and what our egos replace it with. So the collective will have the power to make truth whatever they want it to be. Hayek goes on. The tragedy of collectivist thought is that, while it starts out to make reason supreme, it ends by destroying reason, because it misconceives the process on which the growth of reason depends. Now, the book gets pretty deep at this point. We move into the socialist roots of Nazism, and he brings up blood and soil and the German tradition. He also covers a view I do not hear many people connecting regarding World War II. He brings up the commercial civilization of England versus the heroic culture of Germany, the colliding of ideas between the ideal of freedom from 1789 and the ideal of organization from 1914. Two ideas were at war, the right of the individual versus the organization of the collective. The ideals would battle it out during this period in World War II across multiple continents. And in terms of revolutions, Germany was the revolution from the mindset of the past, and the Allies were the counter-revolution. And he kind of makes this point clear in this next statement. The structure of the English nation is based on the distinction between rich and poor, that of the Prussian on that between command and obedience. The meaning of class distinction is accordingly fundamentally different in the two countries. History often pins one significant factor on why a war was fought: slavery, Holocaust, attacks on tea. But the context has to be explored all the way down to the ideals of the people and the culture, down to what watered the roots. Only then do we realize the truth that the winning side often sweeps under the rug before the smoke clears. So if Germany wanted to change the ideals of its people, they had to shake off the influence and the ideals of Western liberalism. And Hayek states the Third Reich was intended to give the Germans a socialism adapted to their nature and undefiled by Western liberal ideas, and so it did. He brings up how the type of education can exacerbate the shifts in ideals. It is not that one is more educated than the other, but the type of education, a shift from the humanities to the realities. And this is important. Hayek says, and perhaps no other country provides a better illustration of the effects on a nation of a general and thorough shift of the greater part of its educational system from the humanities to the realities than Germany between 1840 and 1940. He is not referring to a decline in education, but a transformation in education, a shift from a liberal education to a specialized education. The shift was in the goal of what education accomplished, what the purpose of education was for, from developing the individual to supporting the state. And Hayek says, the way in which, in the end, with few exceptions, her scholars and scientists put themselves readily at the service of the new rulers is one of the most depressing and shameful spectacles in the whole history of the rise of National Socialism. It is well known that particularly the scientists and the engineers, who had so loudly claimed to be the leaders on the march to a new and better world, submitted more readily than almost any other class to the new tyranny. If we scream trust the scientists, we have to make sure those in support of the science are being ethical. We have to make sure they have not been compromised and have the courage to seek the truth that science is supposed to give us. And propaganda may have you imagining the most incompetent class of individuals as the potential fascist, but it will most likely be the intellectuals who think they know what is best for everyone else. The real fear lies in what we will discuss next, because it is visible in our society today. The new movement of organizers will be the capitalist organizers of monopolies, of companies so big they are too big to fail. The companies that have GDPs the size of small countries. The term they used back then was corporatism. And Hayek states, the aim is not a totalitarian system, but rather a sort of cooperative society in which the organized industries would appear as semi-independent and self-governing states. A state which allows such enormous aggregations of power to grow up cannot afford to let the power rest entirely in private control. I would add the government becomes controlled by them. This would be realized in my lifetime, at least in my opinion, with the Supreme Court case Citizens United. Companies like Amazon, Meta, and Nvidia are not going to allow private citizens to determine their course or destiny. And when money starts flowing freely from corporations to politics, then the game is changed until war or revolution resets everything. Hayek says, the state itself becomes more and more identified with the interest of those who run things than with the interest of the people in general. The fear now is foreign influence as well as corporate. Add religion, such as Sharia law, as it's spreading west. The government is no longer made up of we the people, but the interest of those in control globally. So the question arises, how do we fix it? Sadly, at this point, we do not have the tools of virtue which create the desire to do so. The majority are unwilling to give up the comfort and safety of what this system has created for them, even though this safety is a house of cards. You will over time lose freedoms and opportunity and become less equal, but it will be so gradual, we will all just accept it. We fall into the cycle all civilizations arrive at. It's so predictable that it's nearly a law of human progress. Hayek states, it is by thus submitting that we are every day helping to build something that is greater than any of us can fully comprehend. The move to collectivism and the support of these large systems provides us a release from responsibility. This sounds great at first, but when you remove the hardship, you remove the growth. If there are no consequences to bear or sacrifices to be made, then morals are hard-pressed to develop. Hayek leaves us with this. If we are to succeed in the war of ideologies and to win over the decent elements in the enemy countries, we must first of all regain the belief in the traditional values for which we have stood in the past, and we must have the moral courage to stoutly defend the ideals which our enemies attack, not by shamefaced apologies and by assurances that we are rapidly reforming, not by explaining that we are seeking some compromise between the traditional liberal values and the new totalitarian ideas, shall we win confidence and support. Our unwavering faith in those traditions which have made England and America countries of free and upright, tolerant and independent people is the thing that counts. Was Hayek right? That is the question. The discourse surrounding his book are that his predictions, for the most part, fell flat. But most of the major critiques on this book are decades old. In my opinion, this book is just as relevant today as it was back then. I fear sometimes predictions have a way of becoming reality shortly after we have given up on them. The road to serfdom is our low point in this reading series. It is a destination we need to steer away from. Now, my views differ from Hayek some, but I tried to explain his to the best of my ability. This is a harder book. No offense to economists, but they are not the best authors sometimes. But I still enjoyed reading, and I learned a good bit from this book. So these are just my personal takeaways. I'd love to hear if you have critiques that differ in any way. So please let me know what you think in the comments down below. We then move into our last book in the reading series, which will be the hard, difficult solution to all these problems. These books are linked below again if you want to follow along in the series. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks so much for watching. Drink some amazing coffee, read some amazing books, and I will see you very shortly. And looking at the time, I realize it's going to be a long video, and I apologize for that. Anyway, I love you all, and as always, I finally finished. Stay blessed.
All the dreams are locked up. I'll go and find it. It's good.